Hello and welcome, everyone. My guest today is Jacki Saorsail. Jacki works in regenerative agriculture and regenerative enterprises as a consultant and a community organizer. Jacki realized that, like the soil, her microbiome affects her overall health and well-being. So we're going to get into agricultural wellness, enterprise wellness, and human wellness, hopefully connecting the three to outline maybe a vision of what's possible. Jacki, thanks for coming on.
Awesome. Thank you. That was great.
How you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. Yeah, doing really great.
Why don't you get us started with telling a little bit about yourself? And we were discussing earlier, maybe a bit about your health journey and how that's led you to where you are.
Yeah, so the first time I tried the keto diet, which I'm on now, was actually doing the Candida diet because I had a Candida overgrowth in my throat. I actually think my problem started before that because growing up, I had a lot of like allergy type symptoms.
Hmm.
And I know you've mentioned being in a moldy house. I don't know if it was mold though. I actually think it was milk and cookies syndrome. I don't know if you've seen that TED Talk
No,
by
I
a
haven't.
yeah. There was a pediatrician. I forgot her name. Just look up TED Talk milk and cookie syndrome. But she was talking about how she has a lot of kids coming in and having these allergy type symptoms. But she figured out that a lot of times it's actually acid reflux because they're drinking a lot of milk and eating a lot of sugar right before bedtime, like ice cream and stuff, and it's causing them to have acid reflux, and it's like burning their esophagus, and so they're being all snotty, and it's affecting their immune system. But when she got their parents to stop feeding them dairy and sugar, they got all better. And so my mom would give us a big glass of milk with dinner, every night. At least it was whole milk. But, that plus eating a lot of sugar, I think it just kept me constantly inflamed and snotty. And I had really bad acne. And every time I get a cold, I get it worse than everybody else and be sick for months. So I think it was something like that. And so the candida might have even started back then.
Hmm.
And then just going through college and continuing to eat a lot of sweets. And I did catering for a while and like shoving all the like leftover stuff down my throat and stuff like that. It got really bad. And so I did the Candida diet, got a little better. I was dating a vegan at the time. We
Hmm.
can talk about my experience with that.
Yeah.
But I wasn't vegan, but I was eating a lot of beans and rice.
Yeah.
And so that plus catering, I got sick. And so I did the Candida diet for a few months, went back to kind of a whole foods diet and just tried to keep my sugar intake down, but I still didn't feel great. But then I got pregnant and it got really bad, I think, because of the hormone shift. And so I was on the Candida diet the entire time I was pregnant. For anybody who doesn't know, it's basically keto, just no carbs. It was very difficult, but I felt great and I didn't gain any baby weight. But I had to go back to eating carbs because you need glucose to make breast milk. And so it's very dangerous to breastfeed
Wow.
and be on keto. So I went back to eating some carbs and that was okay for a while, but again, just didn't feel good. Low energy, depressed, aches and pains. And so when I heard about keto, I was working at Natural Grocers, and at the time they had like a keto reset program. And I was like, that sounds a lot like the Candida diet. I should try that. And so at the beginning of 2020, did their keto reset program. And I've been on it ever since because I just feel so amazing. My joint pain has gone away. My acne, I had still acne on my back. It's completely gone away. Um, I just feel amazing. I have so much more energy. Don't have that afternoon slump anymore. And I enjoy it. And I really don't feel like I'm missing out on anything because I can still, sweeten things with stevia and have, there's all these keto options. And so I really don't feel like I'm missing out on anything.
That's good. So you were eating a lot of processed foods, a lot of sugary foods, and a
Not
bit
even
more.
processed foods. I
Yeah.
was in a very healthy vegan situation.
Okay, but as a
I
kid,
mean,
you were eating a lot
as
of
a
processed
kid,
foods?
no, my mom cooked, I
Okay.
mean, yeah, we'd have some like snacky kind of food, but, I wouldn't say I was eating a lot of processed food. We hardly ever went out
Hmm.
to eat. But sugar, quite a bit
Yeah.
of sugar. Yeah.
Okay, so a lot of high sugar foods, and then you started to eat a little bit more plant-based, and then you found that you had low energy and candida issues, and now that you've done keto, you have much more sustained energy and a lot less inflammation,
Yeah.
right? That's
Hmm.
wonderful. Okay. And I didn't know that about mothers with breast milk. Are there no mothers who do keto who breastfeed their
They have
kids?
died, like almost died, like
Really?
went into a coma. One. Yeah.
I swear I have not read up on this at all. So
Uh-huh. You can do
nobody
it while you're
nobody listen to
pregnant,
me, but
but to generate, because you need constant, because lactose is sugar,
yeah.
right?
Yeah,
So to
yeah.
make lactose, you need a lot of glucose. And if you have to break down protein in
Yeah.
order to make that glucose, you're going to eat you're going to eat yourself. And she starved her brain until she went into a coma
Oh,
because she
yeah.
didn't have enough glucose.
So did the mother preferentially make breast milk despite her own health?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, mothers will do that. Even some nutrients, like I think B2, they'll, even if you're deficient in B2 or other nutrients, you'll just put it into the breast milk as much as you can. And
Mhm.
yeah. Hmm. And so you were also into regenerative agriculture,
Yeah.
and you talk a lot about soil and the microbes in the soil, and you
Hmm.
kind of look at that holistically. And I would love to get into how that relates to perhaps our gut health, because a lot of times we look at a lot of symptoms, like you had a lot of inflammation, you're tired all the time, and maybe skin issues, and those could all be looked at as separate symptoms. But you, through your diet and basically the environment inside of your body, looked at how those were all connected, or at least figured out something that got to the root of all of that. And people are perhaps people are less well educated on soil, but we can get into that and how the health of the soil is really important for a lot of symptoms for agriculture.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, there's a few connections here. One is that it's kind of the analogy of the gut microbiome and the soil health is a really good one because they're very similar. And what we're doing with conventional agriculture using chemical fertilizers is basically we kill all of the microbes in the soil. It's just like killing everything in your microbiome, and then we give them this chemical fertilizer. It's like putting an IV in your veins and just feeding yourself through that.
Yeah,
You
and
know, and so
the pesticides are kind of analogous to antibiotics, eh?
yeah, it kills everything in the soil and on the surface of the plants as
Yeah.
well.
A lot of people have
And
health problems after getting antibiotics.
yeah, so the plants that we're eating are like bubble boy, they're just
Yeah.
devoid of microbes. And so they're very unhealthy. Like they look healthy. Like you buy a potted plant, I've got some here that I got from the store, but if you don't continue misting it with the same chemical fertilizers that they were misting it, it starts looking sad after like a few days
So it's
because
not
there's
resilient.
nothing in the soil, or if there is nutrition in the soil, it's not capable of absorbing it because there's no microbes. So if you get a potted plant, if you want to keep it alive without, feeding it chemicals, you got to replenish the microbes in the soil. And there are ways to do that, just like you take a probiotic, you can do that with your plants as well.
Is that kind of suggesting that the plant would be decaying if it wasn't covered in pesticides? That the plant is weak and so it should be decaying, and microbes in the environment
No,
would
it's not
eat
the
it up.
pesticides, it's the fertilizer. So like
Yes, but
nitrogen salt
yeah,
fertilizer that every day they'll like mist it and it just soaks in through the leaves. And so it's just like giving somebody an IV. If you pull out the IV, they're going to starve. Even if you
okay,
feed them food, they can't digest it.
yes,
So like the plant has food in its stomach, it has food in its soil, but it can't digest it because there's no microbes.
okay, I see,
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah. So plants need to be in symbiosis with the microbes, just like we're in symbiosis with the microbes. And so we have all these problems in agriculture with pests, including like fungus in our crops. Well, there's no probiotics to compete with
mhm.
the bad stuff, So that's one of the problems we keep having to use more and more pesticides and more chemicals is because we've made them so susceptible to disease by taking away their immune system. Because just like in our gut is a big part of our immune system, the major part of our immune system. The microbes in the soil are the major part of the plant's immune system.
Is it from the soil that these plants get nutrients that would naturally defend themselves against pests?
Yeah, so if you actually focus on feeding the soil and building the microbes in the soil as your first priority, the plants will create those phytochemicals, those poisons, those toxins that you were talking about in your last, video. They'll make more of them, which will protect them from insects and bacteria and fungi, right? If you had healthy enough plants, they should be impervious to those things.
So we are both taking away from the nutrition that a plant would get, and then because of that, our plants are susceptible to pests, and to counteract that, we spray them with chemical pesticides.
More chemicals. Exactly. It's a cycle. Okay. And it's getting worse. We're using more and more chemicals every year because we've depleted the soil more and more, right?
What exactly are the microbes doing in the soil? Does anybody know?
A bunch of things. I mean, it's just as diverse as your own microbiome. There's trillions in a handful of soil, all different kinds, not just bacteria, but fungi like mushrooms, and there's protozoa, and I'm not a soil microbe expert, but there's a lot of different things, even viruses, and so some of those things are competing with each other. And like that's the immune system part of it, right? It needs to be balanced. And part of it is the bacteria that will like grow right around the plant's roots, and they will break down the minerals and make them available through their waste to the plants. Like the plants, just like we are actually absorbing the stuff that's left over after the bacteria eat our food, the plants are digesting what's left over after the bacteria eat what's in the soil, the organic matter and the minerals.
Almost like how respiration between plants and humans, we produce more CO2, and then they take the CO2, produce oxygen, and we consume the oxygen. Is it something like that?
Yeah, microbes are just as important, as like the balance between plants and animals.
So the microbes, are they degrading or not degrading, but are they manipulating minerals in a way to make them more bioavailable to the plant?
Yeah. Okay. Through ingesting the minerals, and also through excreting chemicals. So vinegar, for example, which is produced by sorry, I just lost it. Acetobacter, after fungi make it into alcohol. So yeast make sugars into alcohol, and then Acetobacter makes the alcohol into vinegar, right? That vinegar can change back and forth. The bacteria can change the acidity of the soil to break down different minerals.
Okay. Very cool.
Just like vinegar dissolves things, right?
Yeah.
And the bacteria can actually manipulate the vinegar to change the acidity. And so like people say like certain plants should have more or less acidic soil. That's actually not true. If there's enough correct bacteria in the soil, the bacteria will change the acidity. You don't need to change the acidity. You just need to provide what's necessary for the soil to change its acidity to what the plant needs. Like just because you take a soil sample next to a blueberry bush and it's more basic, that doesn't mean that blueberries need more, or I don't know if it's acidic, but if that doesn't mean that they need more basic soil. That means that the bacteria around the roots of the blueberry are creating a more basic environment for the blueberry.
Okay, so the bacteria are manipulating the pH of the soil to optimal levels. Do they do that for whatever plants are near them to optimize for them? Do they somehow know that?
Yeah, and there's certain types of bacteria that work better with certain plants. So, some plants need those. Like we actually spray like plant seeds, like peas, will coat them in bacteria that will help them grow because they need that particular bacteria to grow. Right. And that's what makes it's actually the bacteria that makes them nitrogen fixing as well. Like we think that just legumes are nitrogen fixing. No, it's the bacteria that grow with legumes that's nitrogen fixing. That bacteria could be around other plants. If the soil is healthy enough, any plant could use those bacteria to be nitrogen fixing. It's just that they're necessary for the legumes to grow because they're symbiotic.
Yes. Could you explain to everybody the mechanisms by which we currently do we grab nitrogen out of the atmosphere, correct? And we've used that to put it into the soil to enrich the soil with nitrogen.
Yeah, I'm not sure about exactly how all they can make chemical fertilizer, but ammonia, creating ammonia, I'm not sure what the process is there. But, basically, and sometimes these chemicals are things that are, they're actually explosives. I don't know if you saw, where was it? Was it like, I forgot. There was some country where there was a huge explosion because there was a tank full of fertilizer that they left for too long, and it's an explosive. It's just a huge amount of nitrogen, right? So we're just taking these explosives and we're diluting them and spraying them on our crops, and it's pure nitrogen. I mean, it's just like putting a IV of sugar in your veins, right? Whereas what should be happening is that the plants should be creating actually the microbes in the soil create that. What happens is plants absorb sunlight. They make sugar in their leaves. They put half of that into the ground through their roots. They exude the sugars out of their roots into the soil, and the microbes eat it. And then they can recycle some of that, I think, back up, or, it keeps it in the system. So, the plants make their own fertilizer from the sunlight. We're just like giving them an extra boost, but the microbes should be supporting them in that process.
Do the plants feed the microbes with their sugars?
Yeah.
How do they do that?
They exude it out of their roots.
Okay. So they build up these sugars using photosynthesis, and part of the reason for that is structure for the fibers, but part of the reason for that is also to give a little bit to their microbe helpers.
Yeah. I mean, it seems a little odd. Yeah, I'm not sure. I've got a little gap in my knowledge there of exactly how the chemical process works with the nitrogen. But yeah, I know that the plants can do it naturally with the sunlight and the microbes, but if you take the microbes out of the equation, you have to supplement.
I see.
Yeah.
So what are some of the things that we are doing other than the obvious, and what are some possible alternatives in terms of agriculture? What are some things that we're doing that clearly aren't working and a lot of people might think work, but actually aren't? And what could we do differently?
Yeah. So, I mean, one thing that I think a lot of environmentalists get wrong is that they think it's so simple, it's just like, oh, well, just don't use chemicals. It's like, it's not that simple. If you just stop using chemicals, all of a sudden your crops are going to die. Like, we're very ingrained in this way of doing things, and switching to a different way of doing things it takes a lot of design. I'm a regenerative enterprise design consultant, or a permaculture design consultant. I do both. And it's really all about designing your system to be more of a closed loop, right? To be more self-sustaining. And that's going to depend on each individual circumstance, right? Different climates, different soils, different crops, and what's available to you to use. But, there's basic principles involved. And so you need to add carbon to the soil, number one. Okay. And so whether that's importing like wood chips or, holes or something that you can add to the soil, or just growing a cover crop and then just chop and dropping it and just letting it, break down into the soil. There's a lot of ways to do that, or bringing manure in, hopefully from close by. You need to build the carbon in the soil because that's where the microbes live. And when we till, it's breaking that up, and it blows off, it evaporates up into the air. A lot of the carbon, it goes up into carbon dioxide or it washes off, washes out. So we're destroying the carbon, and we're also just killing everything in the soil. When you till, it breaks up all the fungus. It exposes the bacteria to the air and the sunlight, and it
Hmm.
sterilizes it. Right. So if you just allow that microbiome under the soil to continue to grow with undisturbed, it will build up more and more carbon over time. Right. If you just leave the roots in the soil to break down, it'll add more carbon.
What does carbon do for the health of the soil? Why is carbon so important?
The microorganisms need it to live on. Like if you just put microbes in sand, they're not going to survive, right? They
Hmm.
need bits of carbon to attach onto. It's their home. So one great way to add carbon that's more permanent is biochar. So you just make charcoal.
Hmm.
But charcoal absorbs stuff, so you have to be careful. They say with biochar, you need to charge it, meaning that you need to put nitrogen and other nutrients into the biochar before you put it in the soil. So just like soaking it in compost tea or
Yeah.
something like that, or fish aminos or something, right? Like you just put as much nutrients in that in the charcoal as you can and break it up, and then you put that into the ground, because unlike like wood, the charcoal will stay around for a really long time, right? It
Hmm.
doesn't break down. And basically charcoal, if you think about it on a microscopic level, charcoal is full of holes, right? It's like a little microbe hotel.
Yeah.
It's got miles of tunnels in it. And so a lot of microbes can get in there and they can set up shop. And even if that gets exposed to the air or the sunlight, they'll be able to hide and
Mm.
survive. So I
Okay, so
really
it's
like
very porous.
biochar, but it takes a lot of like, you have to use energy to make biochar. So you have to burn it, right? So
Yeah.
it's kind of energy intensive. So just adding whatever kind of carbon material you can to the soil, whether it's old hay or, whatever you can compost. Composting at first would be good because hay has seeds in it, but anything you can to build up the soil. And I think it's really important to do that according to your context. And that's a problem with organic agriculture, is that we've said, okay, well, all your inputs have to be organic. Okay, so now I have to import organic manure or organic mulch
Hmm.
from 100 miles away because that's the only certified organic mulch I can find,
Yeah.
right? You can't just use what's right there in your neighbor's field. So when I say regenerative agriculture, that's a big part of it. It's about intelligent design and using what you have available.
We made compost tea in grade three. It was part of this big Earth Day celebration, and I think we were selling them for like $1 a bottle.
Uh,
And but I completely forget what the process was. I imagine it's something like just having compost and that rich soil, and
yeah,
then putting a bunch of water in it, and then
yeah,
draining the water. Is that
yeah.
it?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you don't heat up the water because you don't want to kill
Hmm.
the
Right.
microbes.
It's not like actual.
Unless you're actually, if you're going to bottle it, though, you might, because those microbes are going to create gas and it could explode the bottle. But I wouldn't do that. What you want to do is make it fresh and use it quickly,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because you want to keep those microbes alive. And so I actually use a practice called Korean natural farming, which is a whole set of practices, but it's really about fermenting materials to make inputs. So you can ferment plant material, leaves, fruit. You can, make compost. They have this IMO, indigenous microorganisms process of collecting a healthy sample of microbes from like a nearby forest, and then you propagate those on grain, and then you mix that into your compost. And so you're propagating the indigenous microorganisms in your area,
Hmm.
right? So you want to cultivate as many indigenous microorganisms as you can, and compost them and then add them to the soil.
So you're
Yeah, so
kind
the
of
tea
making
is just diluting it.
you're making like a starter pack for the microbes, and you're feeding it with ideally what it's going to be helping to grow out in the field. So if you're growing corn, you would feed it corn.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And ideally, if you have the facilities and the materials, if you can put that compost tea into your batch of water, into like a big container of water, and bubble it, for like a few hours or
With carbon
overnight.
dioxide or?
No, with oxygen.
Okay.
Just like aerate it,
Yeah.
then you're going to propagate those microbes even more in the water right before you water with it.
Because they're aerobic?
Yeah, so you want a balance of aerobic and anaerobic, and that's kind of a contention because some of the Korean natural farming practices do use a lot of anaerobic. I think the bubbling process actually helps to balance it some because you're giving the aerobic ones an advantage there. But if you do anaerobic processes, like there's one that I've done where you pack fish into brown sugar and then just
Hmm.
put a lid on the bucket and let it sit for 6 months. And it just breaks down the fish, like the bacteria in the fish break it down, basically
Yeah.
makes fish sauce.
Sounds delicious.
But very powerful fertilizer and also full of microbes, but they're anaerobic because they've been in a sealed container. I think as long as you're balancing that with also the IMO is focusing more on fungi, right? You just need to make sure there's enough fungi, and if there's enough carbon, if there's enough like straw, wood chips, whatever that kind of carbon in the soil, that's what the fungi prefer,
Hmm.
right? So they're gonna grow on that.
Earlier, when you were talking about getting carbon into the soil, what came to my mind is I've looked into a little bit of rotational grazing, and that's where you take ruminant animals typically and that graze on the grasses, and instead of just letting them sit on one spot and eating all of their choice herbs and grasses and
Mhm.
then kind of wiping out that population, you kind of move them around
Mhm.
sporadically. And well, I guess it's not sporadic, but
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
well
in
timed.
a pattern. Mhm.
And then this way the grass in the soil gets an optimal amount of feces from that animal and urine and not too much. And also it doesn't get overeaten. But from what I understand, the grasses, like if this is the soil, the top of the grasses get eaten, and then the roots underneath it kind of dissolve into, is it humus?
Yeah.
And then that helps to store more carbon in the soil.
Yeah, that actually makes sense because when you cut off part of a plant, even if it
Hmm.
grows back, part of the roots will die. Like if you take a tree and you cut all the branches off of one side of it, the roots on that side will die, but the other ones will stay alive.
Hmm.
So yeah, it makes sense if you cut it down that the roots somewhat die back, but then yeah, I mean grass is perennial, so it's gonna keep coming back.
Yeah. Have you looked into work around rotational grazing? I
Mhm.
think it's Alan Savory. I know he's done a lot of work on it, and I think it's Joel Sallerton.
Salatin, yeah. Yeah. Alan Savory, he calls it holistic management.
Hmm.
Joel Salatin, I don't know if he has a particular word that he uses, but yeah, I've studied both of them. And yeah, I think that's a really good practice. And you can do different kinds of animals too. So, like if you follow up after the cows leave after a few days, then the cow patties will be eaten up by maggots, and
Hmm.
then you send in the chickens,
Yeah.
and the chickens will eat the maggots and scratch up the cow patties and distribute it into the soil. Because a lot of times in cow farms, I've seen there's just like dried up cow patties laying all over, but they're not incorporated into the soil. So
Mm,
that's what birds are for. They're
right.
supposed to break it up. You need the whole ecosystem. This is what I'm talking about. It's not just
Yeah.
one simple thing or like the organic rules. I really don't like the organic certification because it's just so oversimplified and just like, don't do this, this, and this. Well, then what are you supposed to do? We're not telling people what to do. And the truth is that what to do is going to depend on your circumstance. And so
Hmm.
we really need to be teaching people how to design holistic systems. It's a completely different paradigm.
Hmm. Why do you think we've walked our way into this very reductionist way of looking at it as like, here's a symptom, so here's a solution
Yeah.
to that symptom, but not looking at the overall pattern and what's at the base of it all, which is the soil? Why do you think we're so
Yeah.
focused on these minor
I
things?
mean, the scientific revolution went in that direction. I mean, I understand. I think this is all just a part of evolution. So instead of getting angry about it, like, oh, those stupid white men and their science, like reducing everything, like compared to what was before that, which was kind of haphazard and non scientific,
Yeah.
it made sense to have a while where we got really scientific and looked at things
Hmm.
granularly, right? Like that was a good thing to do for a while. But now we need to look at things holistically. So we need to use the scientific process or even use a slightly altered version of it where we can test more complex systems and not just one variable at a time,
Right.
which is difficult. And we're still trying to figure out how to do that. Like my university that I have a master's degree in regenerative enterprise design is called Gaia University. And it's a self-directed action learning university.
Yeah.
And we practice this holistic design and evolutionary design processes where we design systems and then try to use kind of scientific means to collect data, like what are the outcomes we want? What are the metrics that we're measuring to see if we reach those outcomes?
Hmm.
Let's measure those. And then the next year, you just change it a little bit, or maybe change it a lot if it really didn't work. But yes, there's multiple variables. Yes, that's going to be messy. Yes, you're not always going to understand exactly how everything is working together. But at least through experimentation, you can find a combination of variables that works. Does
Hmm.
that make sense? And that's kind of what you have to do in whatever circumstance you're in, just like we're doing with our health.
Right. So we got a little bit too excited with the science and zooming in on things. And now we just need to zoom out a little bit while incorporating much of because we've learned so much in those narrow fields, but nobody's really talking between those fields. And so
Yeah.
if we could just kind of zoom out and have people like yourself who are looking at all those fields and combining all that information and integrating it all, then that's when we can kind of look at holistic solutions.
Yeah. Reality is so complex,
Yeah, infinitely. Yeah.
infinitely, exactly. And so, in your last conversation, you were talking about the different vitamins and like,
Mhm.
okay, there's people who have done studies on this vitamin or this vitamin or this vitamin, or maybe like three vitamins together,
Yeah.
but there's no studies on all of them. And, if you have a person who's deficient in three different things, that person is going to react very differently to supplementing with one thing than
Yeah.
someone who's deficient in a different three or four things.
It's almost like they all work together.
Exactly. Exactly. And the same is true of a farm.
Right.
We should be treating a farm the same way we treat our own bodies. Like we have to experiment to figure out what works for us.
Yeah. Well,
Right.
we
And
should
then
treat a
what they,
farm the way that we should treat our bodies, not the way that we
yeah,
do, perhaps. Yeah.
right. Exactly. Exactly. And just for a long time, agriculture taught people to just do things the same way. And this is the way you do it. You till it, you add chemicals,
Mhm.
seeds, blah, blah. That's it, and this is the way we do it. And I would say, fortunately, we're at a point now. It's kind of a tipping point where that generation of farmers is retiring because they're a bunch of baby boomers, and anyone our age, my age, I'm 40. Anyone my age or younger who wants to get into agriculture. I mean, do you want to run a chicken CAFO? Do you want to
Yeah.
have a huge metal building with 5,000 chickens stuffed in it that are all standing up to their elbows in feces and stinks to high heaven? Do you want to do that? I don't. Do you want to drive around a big old tractor that costs $5 million and breaks down all the time and be, millions of dollars in debt and not be able to pay your bills because you're only getting a few cents per pound for what you're growing? Who wants that? Nobody wants that. And so anybody who's getting into it now is interested in these practices, but they're not being taught in the universities. Not seriously and not at scale, because a lot of people haven't really even figured out how to do it yet.
Yeah. So maybe people who their parents are in the business and it gets handed to them, but hopefully people are starting to see the downsides of what we've been emphasizing so much in the past century, and hopefully the pendulum's starting to swing the other way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Mhm.
it seems to be, but we just need a lot more awareness and education, and it's a paradigm change. That's what I'm saying.
Mhm.
I'm just like
Yeah.
with our health, like realizing that your mental health is largely dependent upon your physical health. Like that is a huge paradigm change.
Yeah, we've completely just separated the two as if like there's mental health here, there's physical health here, as if they don't have overlap. I mean, most people integrate a little bit of overlap, but like, yeah, you really can't separate them. And that's what I
Yeah.
talk about in some of my videos, but we can get into that. But So if somebody has a large scale operation, they might come to you or somebody like you who does this consulting. If somebody, let's say they're at home and they have, maybe they have a homestead or a small farm of their own, and they wanted to implement things right away, or perhaps not right away, but they wanted to make some changes to make their uh, production a little bit more holistic and sustainable. What sort of recommendations would you make?
There's a ton of information out there. If you look up regenerative agriculture, holistic management, permaculture, I mean, those are
Mhm.
kind of the key words, and you're going to get a huge amount of, YouTube videos and books and all of that. And so there's a lot of really good. I mean, just find a source that you like. Korean natural farming, is another one. So, everybody's going to be kind of drawn to a different school of thought or set of practices, and it depends on what you want to grow. But just look it up. You'll find it. It's there. Pretty easy to find. Dan Kittredge with high bionutrient farming is one
Mhm.
where I learned some of the soil science stuff from, and he's a little out there. I mean, you'll find more or less kind of esoteric kind of practices. Like there's the Rudolf Steiner biodynamics is kind of out there.
Yeah, I'm
There's
familiar with him through more health and philosophy and education, but did he get into agricultural
Oh yeah,
sciences?
he had
He was into
biodynamics.
everything, yeah.
That was before organic. He was one of the original like natural farming teachers. Yeah.
Interesting. What did he talk about?
So biodynamics is a lot like Korean natural farming. Actually, it's like fermenting, making different inputs for your garden. But he also talked about like the moon cycles, which
Hmm.
makes sense because when the moon is up, the gravity of the moon actually pulls water up into the surface of the soil.
Really?
And so, yeah, significantly, there's a tide in the ground.
Okay.
As much as the tide,
Okay,
the
fair.
water
Yeah,
comes
the
up in the
tide does
soil.
do a lot. Okay.
Yeah, and so he talks about like working with the moon cycles,
Hmm.
and so it's pretty cool. It's pretty cool. So yeah, like I said, like everybody's gonna find one they're like, ooh, this is cool, and they like that particular approach to it.
Yeah, Rudolf Steiner, he's an interesting cat. I read some of his ideas about blood flow and the heart, and he posits that it's not so much that the heart pumps the blood, but it's that the blood pumps the heart. And I think it's somewhere in the middle, but I'll just say what he says. He argues that because uh, the heart is basically like, like the size of your fist here, and its walls are like no more than 1 inch thick at parts, and there's just no way that it could have enough strength to produce the mechanical pressure to pump heart through blood vessels,
Mm,
which
mm,
apparently we have enough blood vessels to wrap around the world 3 times or to
mm,
cover a football field in terms of surface area. And it's an insane amount of surface area and length. But he argues that, and then he also argues that because the aorta, like which comes out of the heart, and because every time your heart beats the aorta, you would expect it if the blood was pumping, if the heart was pumping blood out, you would expect it to go like this, just like a hose does when the pressure
mm,
increases, but
right.
apparently it does this every
Yeah.
time. And I think there's something to it. I don't think the heart does everything, and I think we know that
Yeah.
already because our
Well, but
muscles.
blood is pressurized, right? Like if you poke a hole, it'll squirt
Mhm.
out, right? So like having that pressure in the system already might be a significant part of it. I don't know.
Yeah, I could see that
Yeah.
because I don't. It's not like it generates the pressure to move it when it's at. It's not like it's. Well, he also argues. Okay, I'll just finish his arguments. He argues that the blood is fastest coming out of the heart, and then it slows down at the in the capillary when it
Mm,
gets to the cell, and it kind of does a wiggle back and forth before it as it diffuses nutrients across to the cell and takes in carbon dioxide, and then it stops there, and then it gets back going again. And his
mm,
argument there is if you had a hill and you're pumping water, you wouldn't put the pump at the top of the hill where the water is flowing the fastest. You would put the pump at the
mm,
bottom of the hill so they could get back up again and get going.
mm,
And things that intrigue me on his ideas with that is that we already know that our muscles contract, and that sends a lot of blood flow back to the heart, and that helps a lot. So obviously, everybody knows that the heart doesn't do all of it. But another thing that's interesting is Dr. Stephanie Seneff looks at cholesterol sulfate, and Gerald Pollack, he has some great books on the fourth phase of water. And if the thing is that the water inside of our bodies is actually, it's not liquid, it's actually in a gel-like state. So it's
Mm,
called the fourth state of water.
mm,
And it's somewhere, it's like a plasma between liquid and solid. And basically, if you structure the water, so it's called structured water or EZ water for exclusion zone water, because it forms an exclusion zone. And I won't get into all of it, but basically the water is electrically structured. And if it's going through a hydrophilic tube, such as an artery, then it can actually be self-propelled. And engineers actually use this
mm.
technology. They make tubes that can self-propel water or electrically structured water, similar to blood.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
yeah, it's
In biodynamics, he talks a lot about water flow. He has a system where you build a ramp and then the water flows down like this,
mhm.
right? And so you pump it up to the top and then it makes this like swishy swish, 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 which would be great if you add the Korean natural farming inputs because it would aerate it. Like instead of bubbling it, you would just run
Mhm.
it down. But he actually thinks that this pattern of the water swishing and swirling
Something about
in
the
spirals.
vortices and the geometry.
Yeah, he thinks that like
Yeah, he
improves
said
the
that about the
structure of the
heart
water
too.
or
Yeah.
something like that. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. It's interesting. And yeah, I honestly think that if we could understand everything about water, we would understand just about like 50% of everything. Because like
Right.
biology is water, everything to do with plants and animals, it's all water,
Yeah.
and our health,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
it's involved with everything. And
Yeah. And
water
then the
is so
carbon in the
mysterious.
soil holds the water as well.
Hmm.
So yeah, without carbon, the water would just go right through the soil. Right.
Okay. And that's kind of the difference between sand and dirt and soil.
Well, yeah, so the dirt would be a mixture of sand and clay. And
Hmm.
clay can hold water some, but when clay hardens, it gets, hard as a rock
Right.
and compacts. So you got to have that carbon in there. Whether you have too much sand or too much clay, the solution is to add carbon. Don't worry about balancing your sand and clay. Just
Okay.
add more carbon.
Yeah. We're talking about these, you're talking about Dan Kittredge and we were just talking about Rudolf Steiner.
Hmm.
Do you see a pattern with people who are, I feel like they're very high in openness and they integrate a lot of ideas and they're kind of, they find it hard to do like the narrow focus.
Hmm.
Whereas I feel like most people are in that boat where they are very narrow focused and don't see the connections between things. And then there's these people like Rudolf Steiner is an extreme example who see a
Hmm.
ton of connections,
Hmm.
and those types of people seem crazy to most people
Yeah,
because like
it's an
they
ENTP.
they just can't conceptualize what that would be like and all the connections that they're seeing. Like, I mean, or somebody like Kanye, I don't like he's a weird guy, but like he's obviously a creative genius, and like you know say whatever you want about his character, and obviously he's had some moments, but he sees things and connections between things and words like nobody else, and I think that makes him. It's very hard for people to relate to him, for
Mhm.
everybody basically.
Yeah. Yeah, I have that problem too.
Yeah.
Been trying to find partners to join my Regeneration Federation and um, I'm really looking for other business consultants and cooperative developers
Hmm.
for the initial kind of partners. But I've been talking about this for 20 years and people just smile and nod and go, yeah, that's a great idea, Jackie. Have fun with
Hmm.
that. I'm like, somebody help.
Yeah, it's hard for those types of people to narrow down to narrow down their very broad vision into like a actionable goal.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, I've gotten there, I've got a plan. I need to find initial partners, trying to create a cooperative federation for
Hmm.
regenerative enterprises, so that we can incubate organizations that will, use these practices. And it's not just maybe this is where we can kind of pivot into the other topic I want to talk about is it's not just the agricultural component, the organizational structural component is really where I have even more passion. That's really
Hmm.
where more of my expertise is like, how do we structure our organizations to be regenerative? And so that, because I see the problem is when you try to apply these new paradigm ideas within old paradigm structures, like a corporation, they get corrupted,
Hmm.
right? Because those structures are not meant for that kind of work,
Hmm.
right? So I'm trying to find new organizational structures that will support those practices to not just sustain, but actually get better over time. Like, how do we create evolutionary structures that will constantly be improving our practices and improving our impacts?
Hmm.
That's what I think regenerative really means.
Can you give us an example of that?
Yeah, so like a governance structure, like I'm a big fan of holocracy because it allows the roles in the organization to easily be redefined and moved around so you can find the best fit for the roles that need to be done and the people to fill those roles, right? If you just create a really strict like top-down hierarchy with clearly with these really solidly defined roles or job descriptions that can't easily be changed, then you're gonna get kind of stuck in things not working well, and there's no way to change it,
Hmm.
right? Like we need evolutionary structures.
So how would you go about managing that?
Yeah. So my current hypothesis, which I am putting out and wanting to find people to get on board with and let's test it, is that if you create a cooperative, specifically a cooperative federation, which is a cooperative of cooperatives, and you run that with holocracy, which is this evolutionary. It's like it's a distributed decision making structure. So you're trying to distribute authority and give the people who are on the ground doing the work as much decision making power as possible.
Hmm. So more
Okay, very
bottom up and less top down.
yeah. Exactly. I mean, it still has a hierarchy, but it's a hierarchy of work and it's very flexible. Like you can redefine things fairly easily through a governance process. Um, So I think if we combine these together, that we can create a structure that is evolutionary enough that it can figure out the best way uh, to incubate. It's like a business accelerator to create cooperatives that use regenerative practices, and support them to continue to be regenerative over time. So I created a certification, a regenerative enterprise certification that's design based. So each organization would create a design for their organization. So these are the principles. I came up with 16 design principles for regenerative enterprises, and you have to explain how your organization is trying to meet each one of those principles, and then what could you do better? How could you do that better? And then every year you just come up with a few goals to get yourself closer to meeting those principles. So, like,
Mhm.
how are you going to improve your organization every year? And so that's going to depend on each organization, right?
Mhm.
It's not cookie cutter. It's like if your organization is really good at environmental sustainability, but you have a big pay gap, what can you do to improve the pay structure so that the people at the bottom are getting paid more compensatorily, like something like that. What's going to be the best bang for your buck for your organization to improve your practices. And so you just set your own goals and work with a consultant, and then we have a vetting process for those plans that we've got a public interview. I could think of it as an interrogation, like why is this your plan? Why are you doing this and not that? Is there something you could do better? And like we really interrogate them on why are you doing it this way? Have it be an open forum so anyone
Yeah.
can come in and challenge them on it. Say, hey, you're saying that you're doing that. That's not really what you're doing. I think we need open dialogue,
Hmm.
total transparency, total complete transparency of organizations. What are you doing? What are you trying to do better? How are you doing it? What are you measuring? Bring it. Show us what you're doing.
Now,
Tell
are you
us what you're
talking
doing.
about, I get that with governments, but an organization like a tech business?
It could be.
But
What if that
would,
happened with
I mean,
Facebook?
but don't they
Wouldn't
deserve
you
the,
love that?
yeah, but don't they deserve to keep information proprietary? And
I'm sure there's proprietary information, but how much what your environmental impacts are shouldn't be proprietary information. I think that that's it. It's the public good, and I'm not trying to force
right,
anybody. I'm not a communist. I'm not trying to force everybody to do this. This is a
right.
voluntary organizational structure. It's a certification. It's
Okay.
similar to B Corp, but with B Corp, they just measure a bunch of metrics. Say, okay, what's your pay gap? What's the difference between the highest paid and lowest paid person in your company? What's your carbon footprint, which is very
Mhm.
difficult to calculate. You know, what kind of light bulbs are you using? Like they ask all of these questions.
Mhm.
And if the company gets a certain score that's high enough, they pass. So they could be really good in some things and really bad in others. But as long as they pass, but what's the incentive there? The incentive is to do the least possible to pass the test and to not improve,
Mhm.
right? I don't like that. And also whether those particular questions are even applicable or important in that context, like are your materials that you use recycled or environmentally friendly? Well, if you're a consulting business, you don't use materials. Oh, the
Right,
paper I print on, yeah, I use recycled paper. That's like minuscule. So I could get a perfect score in that, but be treating my employees horribly and still pass the test,
right.
right? Like I don't like that. I want a design-based certification that is pushing organizations to become better. And I think the only way to do that is through transparency and accountability. And again, this is a theory. This is a
Mhm.
hypothesis that this could work. So, I mean, I guess it's those three pieces. And I'm not pushing holacracy down the throat of every organization that's a part of this. I just, at least at the top level, I would like to use it, and I'd recommend trying it. But cooperatives, holacracy, or some sort of distributed decision making structure, and the certification design based certification.
Mhm.
So my idea is if we use these three things and make organizations using that we will have a more evolutionary regenerative system that will continue to improve its measurable impacts over time.
One question I would have for the measurement thing is that I know there's a phenomenon where whatever you measure, it changes, things will change around that measurement to get better scores of that measurement, but in ways that you wouldn't anticipate and hope for, as
Yeah.
in I'm trying to think of a really good example, but something like if you're like what type of light bulbs they use, they would change the exact light bulbs, but it would be I'm trying to think of the examples that have been
Yeah.
given, but I'm struggling
Yeah.
right
I
now.
know what you're saying. I know what you're saying.
But
Yeah.
whatever
Yeah.
metrics are used, you have to be careful because that metric will change, but the
Exactly. And
it,
that's why I
it might
say,
not be precisely the outcome that you want.
yeah.
Right.
And that's why I say it has to be according to the context.
Hmm.
You come up with the metrics that are best going to measure that outcome that you're trying to achieve. And the outcome you're trying to achieve is according to the context of what's the biggest bang for your buck to improve your environmental, social, and economic impacts.
Hmm.
Right. And then we've got some design principles, things like distributed authority is one of the design principles. So, how can you distribute authority better in your organization? That's pretty open ended. I'm not saying there's one way to do that. I like holacracy, but that's not the only way to do that. So, I
Hmm.
have it in the certification to encourage them to do that, but they can do it in whatever way they see fit.
Right. Um, who would you be trying to, I don't know if you're like, if this is something that you sell as like as a, um, not as a product, but as a service, who would be your uh,
Yeah. So I'm
target
I'm not
clients?
selling this as a service. I'm
Yeah,
looking for
just
investors.
yeah.
So at this level of this whole system that I'm creating, which is the Cooperative Federation. At this point, I'm looking for initial partners who would be other business consultants or experts and investors. And I'm not looking for, I do need a lead investor who's a certified investor, but beyond that, I'm actually looking to do crowdfunding, equity crowdfunding.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I don't want a few people to put millions of dollars into this. I want a lot of people to put a few hundred or a couple $1,000s into this, right? So that's really what I would be selling, is to invest in this. And yeah, that would just be people who, and I think the real selling point on that is the particular cooperatives that we're going to be accelerating, because it's a business accelerator. So, hey, I've got the Re-inhabit Cooperative is a regenerative landscaping company that teaches people how to do, deep mulch gardening in people's yards, and then sends them out as landscapers and helps them find clients. Who wants to support that? And we're going to fund it. We're going to hire this group of business consultants to help this group of, because the problem is a lot of people in the regenerative agriculture movement don't have a lot of business sense. They're not business experts, right?
Mm-hmm.
They need help, they need support, and they need funding. And so we're going to get, $100,000 together and a team of business experts, and we're going to set them on this project of creating this cooperative. And then we're going to continue supporting them with the certification and ongoing consulting to make sure that they are financially successful. Because a lot of these kind of projects, they might be sustainable, but they're often not replicable or what's the
Scalable?
Scalable, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, they kind of stagnate.
Yeah. I'm trying to wrap my head around all this so we can all understand it. So you're looking at crowdfunding for the initial finances, and then those finances are invested into particular organizations that need help developing themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And this co-op of co-ops basically oversees that and invests into different businesses and organizations, and gets, I guess, as those organizations thrive and do better, that's how they get.
Yeah, there'd be like membership dues that would cover the certification and some ongoing consulting, but we could also provide other business support services like payroll services, accounting services, legal services.
Right.
And I've already got one of the best co-op lawyers in the country on retainer. He helped me write the bylaws for this. Okay. So like having CPAs who specialize in cooperatives, because there's very few of them. So like having some really good people on the team who can support these companies, and they just pay for fees to get those services is the main way that we would make money. And then the investment, it would be, I'd like to do it mostly in the form of revenue sharing agreements. So rather than a loan where you have a set payment, like, it's $1,000 a month to pay it back or something, it's a percentage of income. Not a percentage of profits, that would be dividends, a percentage of income. So you build it into your income structure. So whatever you're charging for your services, you just add 2% that's going to go to pay back what you borrowed.
Mm-hmm. So if I'm an organization and I use your services, 2% of my revenue would go back towards your cooperative? Yeah,
up to a certain limit to pay back, plus some interest, some profit for us to cover, giving you that money for a long amount of time. And then we can use that to reinvest in the cooperatives again, or pay back our investors. And I really like, one of the reasons I really like this structure, this revenue sharing structure, is because it forces those co-ops to be profitable. Mm-hmm. You have to pay back your loan. Once you've paid that back, now you've got 2% extra. Now you have a profit. A lot of times co-ops and regenerative farms, they don't build profit into their structure, and then they're not profitable, and then they can't scale. Like, you need to be profitable. And so it's kind of forcing them to be profitable. And that makes people want to invest in it, right? So they can get another round of funding, right? Or they could just take that as retained earnings and grow using that extra income. But it kind of like, it forces us. I like being constrained. I like having these kinds of constraints where, okay, we have to make this much money, okay, we got to figure it out. Everything is figure outable, right? That everything is possible. Where there's a will, there's a way, right? If we want to figure out a way to train people in regenerative agriculture and have them working together and make that profitable, let's figure it out. Let's not go, oh, there's not enough money in it, blah, blah, blah. Like, there's no excuse. Like, there is a way to do it. Let's just figure it out.
Mm-hmm. What sort of roles would people play at this cooperative?
At the federation level, mostly it's just like people in the business accelerator and consultants and like CPAs and lawyers and stuff. Underneath that, these co-ops could be anything. Yeah, I'm kind of starting in the regenerative agriculture. I mean, that's a real co-op that we're starting, the Re-inhabit Cooperative. There's another one I'm calling the Crop Share Co-op that would be like basically buying shares of crops before they're grown, kind of like CSA, like where you buy a share of, but you could just buy a share of just garlic. Like people could just grow something in their backyard and sell shares of it, like a platform to do that. Is an idea. That one's not as, I've talked to some people about it, but it's just an idea. But other people might have ideas.
Would it be tough to manage quality control?
I see these kinds of challenges as opportunities. Like, we need people to learn how to communicate. We need people to learn how to be responsible, right? And so, like, yeah, it's difficult to hold people accountable in a system like that. Let's figure out a way to do it that helps everyone grow and become better people. Mm-hmm. Like, that's part of the business model. It's like we're helping people to, and the reason that I'm really passionate about that idea is that a lot of people get this idea of wanting to do, grow food in their backyard, for example, and then they start a garden and then they get busy and it goes to shit. What if you had already sold shares of what you're growing to somebody else? That gives you accountability. What if you have to post a photo once a week of your crops and post it on social media to update your shareholders?
What would happen if they don't come up with their crop?
Then we get to do okay, this is another thing I wanted to talk about. This is a great, another turning point. Your videos were talking about how people are acting crazy, with this woke stuff, but you think it's actually like a lot about their health, having poor health, and it's contributing to them acting poorly. What do we do when people act badly? How do we identify bad behavior and how do we address it?
Well, lately we've been glorifying it and encouraging it.
Exactly. So, like, I've been working on this federation idea for 20 years, and I've been at this stage of having it pretty much ready to go for maybe 2 years now. I put it on hold because I got so freaked out by the cancellation culture, and I have a big mouth, that I knew if I went forward without figuring out how to deal with this, that I was going to get canceled. And I wouldn't be able to do what we're doing right now, right? I wouldn't be able to talk about it because if I talk about it, if I say the wrong thing, people are going to cancel me and I'm not going to be able to recruit people, right? Or if I get a bunch of people in, regenerative agriculture is typically a kind of lefty thing. I'm going to get a bunch of woke people in there and they're going to destroy the organization from the inside out, right? Like, I'm like, okay, how am I going to deal with this? And so I've been thinking about that. I've been doing research and like figuring out what's going on. And then, okay, how am I going to address this? And so I've come up with community relational agreements of like conflict resolution, basically. Like, what happens when somebody posts something crazy in our discussion group, right? And so I've come up with a set of rules. I can share those with you.
Right now, would you like to?
Yeah, sure. Here I have a longer version, but I made a shorter version to use like in a Facebook group. So I'll just read you that version. It's a little easier to.
Okay. Yeah, this will help us understand the whole structure and intent.
Yeah. So these are the relational agreements. I've got 4 rules. 1, respect context. So please keep this discussion on topic. Any discussion that's not about blank is subject to censorship. Okay. So that takes care of a lot of your problems of people just like saying random.
Yeah. Keep it on topic. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. We're here to discuss regeneration federation business, right? Anything else is not allowed. Or if you do talk about it, fine, but you can be cut off at any time.
Right.
Okay. 2, respect freedom of speech. Respect people's opinions, especially if they differ from your own. Keep an open mind and assume good faith from others. So freedom of speech. 3, respectful decorum. Use respectful language. If someone says something disrespectfully, please ask them to restate their idea in a more respectful way. We want to help each other find a respectful way to communicate our ideas, not shut each other down. Mm-hmm. So that's actually speaking more to the person who catches the disrespectful language than to the person who said the thing, right?
Yeah, it kind of encourages
How do you
them
respond to someone who said something that you disagree with, right? And you're held to the same standard in how you respond, right?
Yeah, it encourages somebody to take some action towards it.
Yeah. And then 4th is good faith. Good faith means that someone is making a genuine attempt to resolve a disagreement. If they are listening to what the other person is saying, responding to what they said, and are trying to find a solution that meets both parties' needs, they are acting in good faith. If someone repeats their own arguments without addressing the other party's arguments, or refuses to consider logical alternatives, they are not acting in good faith. Mm-hmm. So you have to define what good faith means.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a longer version of that, that's a little bit more legalese, but that's the basic ideas.
And that would be kind of legally binding in this co-op?
Yeah, it would. Yeah, you'd be agreeing to that just by participating. Okay. And so that gives us the ability to censor people. It says in there that participation in our forums is a privilege, not a right. But, there are legal requirements. Like if you are an owner, you get, a vote for like the board of directors. So, we would take away the vote, but you wouldn't be able to be in the forum to discuss things, like we can kick you out of a meeting if you're not behaving correctly, right?
Yeah. My view on the whole, seeing all these behaviors that are less than optimal, I suppose, is that the root of the problem is our physical health. And that, because I notice this very strongly within myself, and I see it in just about everybody I meet, and I see how a very strong association between how physically healthy they are and what they eat and the stability of their mental state and how they view the world. And I really think that a lot of these issues that we're coming across with people using either terrible judgment or just viewing the world as a terrible place, or a lot of the woke movement and the anxiety and the depression that's all weaved into that. I see it a lot as coming from people who are not well nourished, and that because they are you need to be strong to be stable, right? Like you need to have really deep roots to be able to stretch out your branches and to support other things. If you're really weak and vulnerable, then you are going to take on an attitude and a viewpoint that sees the world as threatening, sees other people as threatening and dangerous.
Yeah.
And I think it really messes with people. And I think it's behind a lot of the mental illness.
Yeah. 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 I just think it's important because you were kind of focusing on social justice warriors and how they seem incapable of following the rules that I just read. Mm-hmm. Right? They'll just scream and scream and scream and won't listen to anybody. They're not acting in good faith.
They're very volatile. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think we need to be careful when we're talking about this that, we are talking about the behavior and not just the ideas. Like I can criticize those ideas, because I do think it's a cult, but, you can talk to somebody who's in a cult like Scientology, and they might be perfectly reasonable. They might not be crazy, but they've just become, indoctrinated into that set of ideas. Perfectly intelligent and balanced people, that can happen to them, right? So it's we're not talking about just, oh, you're crazy if you believe these things. Mm-hmm. It's about this behavior where people are behaving. It's like the Salem witch trials. Mm-hmm. And the Salem witch trials we've shown was because of what was it, ergot or something that was growing on the wheat.
Yes.
And it made people crazy. They were having hallucinations. That's what the kind of behavior that we're seeing. People are seeing somebody, and it's you see your neighbor waving around a stick of incense. You don't drag them out of the house and drown them.
Hmm.
because they're a witch, right? Like you can believe the witches are real, but like actually acting on it and behaving that way is crazy, right? So we're just seeing that kind of behavior in this cancellation culture and the way people are acting. And we're saying, hey, there's something wrong with you if that's the way you react to somebody disagreeing with you. Like you need to be able to just do what I just read off. You need to be able to engage in respectful, intelligent conversations in order to be a part of what I'm building here. And I need to be able to communicate that. Like we have standards for behavior here,
Hmm.
and we're not going to put up with disrespectful behavior.
Yeah, but well, I mean, getting back to what what I was arguing is that your brain takes a ton of energy, and if you're not well nourished, like you're not
Mm-hmm.
going to be able to discern things as well,
Mm-hmm.
and you're
Yeah.
not going to be able to let ideas come into your head and stay there and play with those ideas without letting them possess you and take you over. So generally what these people do is they treat every idea like a infectious mind virus,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
you know, they they don't engage with it. And and I think that comes from like physical malnourishment a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
but yeah, you're right to, somebody like Tom Cruise, who by all means appears very healthy and very,
Yeah.
I've seen like some interviews of him, and he's a very respectable person. And then, he believes in Scientology. I think he's like kind of a rare case, I suppose. But yeah, you're right. You can't just judge the person for what they believe. You have to look at it holistically. I guess I would just say that people who are poorly nourished are more susceptible to those pathogenic mind viruses.
Yeah. Yeah. And just then that behavior that makes them incapable of having the conversations that would help them mitigate those those ideas. Because I mean it's not like the ideas are coming from a bad place. And I've talked to plenty of people who even call themselves woke or Marxists. But if they're well balanced, like we can have a really intelligent conversation and
Hmm.
agree, like with the cooperative federation, you can be a communist or you can be a libertarian. Everyone
Hmm.
agrees that we can voluntarily come together and create a cooperative business.
Hmm.
Nobody disagrees with that. I just saw an interview with Ben Shapiro and Anna Kasparian from the Young Turks, and they
Hmm.
both agreed that we should have more cooperative federations like Mondragon. Those words came out of their mouths.
Hmm.
So this is in the zeitgeist that cooperative federations are a solution to our economic problems. I'm trying to put it forth, and it is a bipartisan solution that can be done within our current economic system. But I see that bad behavior where people are unwilling or for some reason due to malnourishment incapable of sitting down and having the necessary conversations that if we bring together a bipartisan coalition of people to create these kind of cooperatives, we're going to have those conversations. So that's
Hmm.
why I kind of put my work on hold for a little bit and did a bunch of research into this area to figure out those dynamics so that I could write that set of rules
Hmm.
and be able to see it coming, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what would be because my suggestions would be to try and improve everybody's health as much as possible through
Right.
nutrition, generally speaking,
Mm-hmm.
and avoidance of toxins. But what would be your approach through kind of enforcing these pro-social behaviors in these?
So, I mean, the fact that I'm starting with regenerative agriculture as kind of the field that I'm starting this cooperative federation, I was trying to say earlier, like we're starting with this, but I don't care if we have light bulb factories or
Hmm.
daycare centers. I don't care what kind of cooperatives we start, but I think starting in regenerative agriculture kind of brings in that paradigm shift of
And
seeing
it
things
makes it somewhat of
holistically.
a closed loop too, because it helps produce better food, and then the better food helps produce more healthier people, and then
Yeah,
healthier
exactly.
people for your co-op.
both these initial cooperatives that I've proposed would be generating food, healthy food in people's yards, right? Or local food, right? That's grown regeneratively. So yeah, I'm just addressing it by creating a container to support that and systems to support that. So we're encouraging it. But yeah, I mean, I don't think you can really impose that. It's just like shifting people's ways of thinking.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So you're looking to develop a paradigm shift.
Yeah. Yeah. A paradigm shift. And I think coming from agriculture, it's less personal. It's less like you are doing something wrong with your body, right? Like people take that very personally, especially if they have like weight issues or something, right? Or health issues. But if you start with agriculture and show them how it works in the agricultural system, it dovetails right into health and nutrition.
Yeah. If they see that we need to treat the environment and the soil in a holistic way, then they might also begin to see that they need to treat themselves in that way too.
Yeah. Yeah. And we talk about that. When I talk about the soil health, I talk about microbiome and in your body and use that as an analogy. So people start getting this immediately.
Okay. I think that's a good place to tie things together and wrap things up. Where can people go if they're interested in these regenerative agriculture, regenerative enterprise ideas and get to know more about what you're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, if you want to find my work, everything is kind of hubbed on my business consultancy website, which is regenerative-dynamics.com. So I've got links to everything from there. And I even have a little wellness coaching practice called ecstatic embodiment that I can take on, like coaching clients if you want to get some keto or exercise coaching. So
very cool. Yeah. So you've been through all that.
I do everything.
For people listening, it's tough whenever you're making any changes. It's always good to have somebody to talk to who's been through those changes and has gone through it all and known what's worked and what doesn't work and can really help you with that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think everybody needs some sort of a coach, I mean, it could just be a friend, but, having, you don't have to have a mental illness to have somebody to talk to, right? Like I think coaching is a really good, or consulting is a really good thing to do when you're trying to do anything, including starting a business. I mean, you can know everything. I know, quite a bit about business, but even I want to have a business coach. I want to work with other consultants because it's hard to see yourself. It's hard to see your own work from the inside, right? It really helps to have an outside perspective.
Excellent. Well, I'll put that link in the description. And awesome. Jacki, thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. This was great.
It was fun.